Xi Jinping and his government, Chinese Communist Party, hates God, hates the creature, the believer, but hates God. And it's reflected in all of their public policies, what they're doing to the Muslims in Xinjiang, the Uyghurs, what they've done to so many people throughout the country. Well, Bishop Xu of Baoding province is, again, a very heroic member of our faith who may be deceased now. We're not sure. He would be very elderly, but he has spent about 40 years in prison because of his allegiance to Rome, to the Vatican, and simply because of his uncompromising belief in Jesus Christ. I met him in the early 1990s, and he had just been let out of prison a short time before that. He celebrated Mass in a very tiny, dingy apartment. And what struck me the most was his love for even his oppressor. I looked in his eyes. There was no sense of getting even or malice towards those who had so grossly mistreated him. He prayed for the persecutors, as Jesus admonished us to do. I argued for his release when he was rearrested, worked with a number of groups, including the Cardinal Foundation, on his behalf for years, and it just recently convened a congressional hearing asking the dictator Xi Jinping, where is Bishop Xu, in a Chinese Laogai or concentration camp. Not only are people undernourished, malfed, and I actually visited a gulag it was called Beijing Prison Number 1, soon after Tiananmen Square, and saw firsthand how gaunt, just like the pictures we all saw from the Holocaust, these men and women actually are. They are subjected to torture, especially when they want additional names of men and women who are part of the faith. And the beatings are horrific. They sexually abuse the women in the most horrific of ways. And for some, they actually take their organs, especially some of the groups like the Falun Gong practitioners. It is a despotic and a barbaric mistreatment of people. I've held hearings on the use of violence by Xi Jinping and his government. It is absolutely prevalent. If you are in one of those Chinese gulags, concentration camps, you will be tortured, and you will be tortured, and you will be tortured.
I started my career during the Cold War, and I started looking at China at that time and realizing that there were dozens of Catholic bishops and Protestant pastors imprisoned for their faith in China, and nobody was talking about it. No one knew their names. So I started documenting them and compiling them in lists. And things got eased a little bit in China. China is in a new period of intense repression against religious believers across the board. China is waging a war on religion. And this began just a couple of years ago in 2018 with a new directive from the president of China, Xi Jinping. This is one of the most important religious freedom issues of our time. The Bible is going through something that it hasn't yet in China, which is a Communist Party retranslation. There has always been integrity to the Chinese translations of the Bibles within China until now. A year ago, the Chinese Communist Party announced new efforts, launching a new 2-year program to retranslate or reinterpret the Bible. I say either or because the word they used, it does not make clear whether they're attempting to retranslate the whole thing or whether they're going to just reinterpret it in the commentary section of the Bible. We have a little clue about what this is like from government textbooks for upper classmen in a school in China last year, in which they translated, retold actually, a doctor, the story of Jesus and the adulterous woman. And at the end of the story, instead of Jesus saying, "Go and sin no more," he actually picks up the stone and stones the woman to death himself. So this is a great distortion of Christian teaching, and it's an example of how the Communist Party is using Christianity now for its own purposes. The purpose of that distortion was to teach students to obey the law, their law, with no mercy. The Catholic Patriotic Church is tightly controlled at this point. Now, it had a little bit more leeway, as did all the churches about 5 years ago, but now it is strictly under surveillance. These churches, these patriotic churches, bristle with surveillance cameras, facial recognition, cameras even going into the churches so that you cannot escape notice of who you are, how many times you're going, and that's considered a black mark if you go too many times. They maintain control over registration and keep score. According to new rules that go into effect May 1, 2021, they keep score with rewards and punishments of those members and the leadership especially who are doing something that the Communist Party did not like, whether they're too fervent in their beliefs, whether they're doing charities that aren't approved, and they're excluding everyone under the age of 18. So the gospel where Jesus says, bring to me the little children, is completely thrown out the window. The children and minors under 18 are banished from the churches by law. And this is at the patriotic churches that I'm talking about as of 2 years ago. This is going to make it extremely difficult to perpetuate the faith. How will the new members of how will they spread the faith if children in the young generation knows nothing about religion? They are banned from the sacraments. They cannot be baptized by law. They cannot receive communion. They cannot learn about Christianity. They cannot have access to their own Bibles. They can only do this in the underground, which is illegal. So in some schools, they're making them swear oaths of atheism. So it's going to be very difficult to attract more members, and it's going to be extremely difficult to attract vocations.
Chinese Communist Party made it the only country in the world where it was illegal to have a brother or a sister, the state interfering in every aspect of people's lives. The Communist Party, and it's an authoritarian system, and the world didn't want to know because it was far more interested in trade relationships, in getting cheap goods on the back of slave labor from Xinjiang, and it was turning a blind eye. But I think that the COVID-19 crisis finally woke people up. The mask, if you like, has slipped on the CCP.
So first of all, I think the free world as a whole really needs to unite and coordinate pressure on the Chinese regime to stop these appalling atrocities and human rights violations. I think the United States, of course, has considerable influence, but I think it's much better when countries stand together, and that will have more effect. If countries act one by one in a piecemeal approach, the Chinese regime can pick countries off one by one and play them off against each other. So I think we need a real coalition of the democratic world to stand together, to coordinate sanctions, diplomatic efforts, and other forms of pressure. Secondly, in terms of the church, I think that the church, in its broadest sense of all traditions, Catholic and Protestant, should be speaking out more. I would really like to see Christian leaders being more visible. It's been very interesting on the Uyghur genocide, at least in the United Kingdom, the community that has really led the way. To be fair, there've certainly been Christian leaders and Muslim leaders as well, but the community that really has led the way has been the Jewish community, because they can see, and it's very rare, of course, for them to make any comparisons with the Holocaust, because understandably they regard the Holocaust as a unique event in history, but they are saying that what's happening to the Uyghurs has parallels with the Holocaust, and so they've been very courageous in that. And I would like to see the church stand up, not just on the Uyghurs, but on what's happening to Christians and Hong Kong and all the other issues. And then in terms of what individual people can do, I would say there's two parts to the answer, I think. The first is sort of practical and political, and that's to raise these issues with your elected representatives, encourage them to take a stand in their legislatures around the world. And secondly, especially if you are a person of faith, pray. And that's why we're having the week of prayer for the church and the people of China. And we hope that people around the world will take that up and will pray for China.